Welcome to the last podcast for this particular unit. It is section 4-3 and it is on biomes. So what is a biome? A biome is a complex of terrestrial, and terrestrial stands for land, communities, that covers a large area and is characterized by certain soil and climate conditions and particular assemblages of different types of plants and animals. Species vary in their adaptations to these different types of conditions. Next, what is an adaptation? An adaptation is an inherited characteristic that increases an organism's ability to survive and reproduce. And if you remember back when we talked about the characteristics of life, adaptation was the A in Fred H. Gark that stood for one of the characteristics of all living things. Some examples of some adaptations, in case you don't remember: spines on a cactus minimize water loss. If you think about the trees here in Wisconsin, they're broadleaf trees so that they can photosynthesize a lot, but because of the climate that we have here, they're able to tolerate the hot weather a little bit differently. Another example are desert rodents. These have adaptations in their kidneys that help them conserve water. So different organisms have different adaptations to help them survive. Plants and animals also exhibit variations in their levels of tolerance. So then the next question is, what is the definition of tolerance? Tolerance is the ability to survive and reproduce under conditions that differ from optimal. And optimal, this word right here, means ideal. Or another way to say that is perfect. So for example, plants and animals in the desert can tolerate temperatures that range from blistering hot to below freezing. So they have a certain level of tolerance that helps them survive. Biomes and climate. We've already talked about climate. The climate of a region is an important factor in determining which organisms can survive there. And we talked about how or what determines climate in section 4-1. We're going to go a little further and talk about something called a microclimate. A microclimate is basically a climate within a climate. Once again, a microclimate is the climate in a small area that differs from the climate around it. So once again, it's like a miniature climate within a very large area. The example that is used, certain streets in San Francisco are often blanketed in a fog while the sun shines brightly just a few blocks away. Another example of a climate within a climate or a microclimate might be like Central Park that sits in the middle of New York City. So if you go from the cement and the high buildings and then go into Central Park, where it has all the vegetation, all the trees, you're going to have a whole different type of climate inside the park than you would if you walked out into the city. So that would be an example of a microclimate. Two main components of climate are temperature and precipitation, and they can be summarized in a graph called a climate diagram. And you'll notice in your notes, this is similar to the graphs that we've been doing in lab, where you have something that is consistent on the bottom. In your latitude lab, you put cities, and the graph that you just did with the wolves and the moose, it was years down here. And as you can see, one side is going to be graphed for temperature. The other side is going to be graphed for precipitation. So now that you have done these graphs twice, you should be experts at viewing graphs that have different information on either axes. The major biomes. Ecologists recognize at least 10 different biomes, and I'm just going to list them off. They are tropical rainforest, tropical dry forest, tropical savanna, and the savanna is what you're going to get in Africa, the desert, temperate grassland, temperate woodland and shrubland, temperate forest, and when you think about temperate forest, this is Wisconsin. Northwestern coniferous forest, the boreal forest, and finally the tundra. Each of the biomes is defined by a unique set of abiotic, and if you remember again, abiotic means non-living, factors, particularly climate, and a characteristic assemblage of both plants and animals. There's often an ecological variation within the biome. For example, changes in microclimate caused by differences in exposure or elevation above sea level. If you think about particular places where they have mountains, and if you think about a mountain, you have and then you go up, and then you go down, and then to the other side. The temperature at the base of the mountain is going to be much different than the temperature at the peak of the mountain. So this is one particular area, but you're going to have a different climate down here, then you're going to have a different climate up at the top. Local soil conditions or the presence of rock outcroppings is also going to change the ecological variation. Boundaries between biomes on a map appear to be sharp. There are often transitional areas in which one biome's plants and animals become more common. So in order to actually give you a better picture of where the different biomes change from one to another, they draw lines on a map. But if you think about if you were moving from the state of Wisconsin, driving south towards Florida, you're going to be slowly changing the way that everything is going, but you don't hit a specific line to say, all right, we're leaving this particular place and we're now going to this particular place. It just kind of flows from one place to another. The characteristics and locations of biomes relate to the patterns of global winds and ocean currents. And this is something, once again, that we talked about in section 4-1. And here is a picture of some of the different biome areas. And we talked about in the first podcast 4-1 that latitude, and remember latitude goes across, plays a huge role in the different zones. So if you kind of think about, and if you look at the picture, if we were to draw in some of those zones, you can see that a lot of the biomes are, if this were the round world, the biomes are consistent across that particular area. Other land areas which aren't really specific as far as their biomes are going to be mountain ranges. And we talked about mountain ranges in that previous slide. Mountain ranges can be found on all continents. And the abiotic and biotic conditions vary with elevation. Once again, when you talk about a mountain, you're going to have different conditions at the base of the mountain than you are at the top of the mountain. We also talked about how there's going to be different vegetation and different animals based on that vegetation that are going to live on that particular mountain. Plants and animals change as you move up the mountain. For example, grasslands on the bottom. As you're moving up, there's then open woodland pines, forests of spruce and conifers as you're getting higher, wildflowers and stunted. Stunted means short. So once again, stunted means short vegetation resembling the tundra, and then ice fields occur at the peaks. So as we're increasing the elevation, the temperature is getting much colder, so you're going to see less and less vegetation as you get to the top of the mountain. The other variation is going to be at the polar ice caps. Icy polar regions border the tundra and are cold all year long. The vegetation is very limited there because of the type of temperature. Mosses and lichens, and once again, we talked about lichens being a pioneer species. So lichen is a vocabulary word that you've seen before, not pronounced lichen. Lichen is a combination of a fungus and an algae. And that's what grows on those icy polar regions. As far as animals go, in the North Polar region, you're going to find polar bears, seals, insects and mites. Those are going to be your dominant animals. And in the South Polar region, the dominant wildlife includes penguins and marine animals. So that concludes an overview of biomes. You'll learn more about the particular biomes when you do your lab the next 3 days.